In September 1966, the Monkees exploded onto TV screens in America. Although their show only lasted 2 seasons, between 1966 and 1970, they released 9 studio albums. I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video, I'm diving deep into the album that started it all, to discover how it reshaped the sound and scope of 60s pop. Inspired by the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night, and described in Newsweek magazine as direct videological descendants of the Beatles, the Monkees were the first rock and roll band to have their own TV series. But while those 58 episodes are still shown and loved by many today, it's the music from them that has endured the most. Now, it's a well-known fact that the Monkees didn't play any of the music themselves on this album. In fact, there isn't a single track on here which features all 4 group members. So why should anyone take it seriously? Well, apart from selling 3 million copies in 3 months, it was the album that launched a worldwide phenomenon. That, coupled with some great fun songs, makes it worth 29 minutes and 39 seconds of your time. So now, let's review this album track by track and uncover the fascinating stories behind the Monkees' debut album.
Here we come.
The Monkees' theme is one of the most recognisable theme songs in music history. But like the Monkees themselves, it was inspired by another British invasion group.
Catch us if you can. Catch us if you can.
Catch Us If You Can by the Dave Clark 5 had been a huge hit for the group in America in August 1965. One of the song's writers, Bobby Hart, remembers walking with his songwriting colleague Tommy Boyce to a writing session in the park, snapping his fingers as they walked. Recently, it was funny to see Paul McCartney and his band singing the song in the same way as they walked to the stage for a gig in London last December.
Hey, we're the Monkees. People say we want you around. We're too busy singing to put anybody down.
The tracking, or basic instrumentation session, took place in RCA's Studio A on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. Wayne Irwin, Jerry McGee and Louis Shelton played guitars, Larry Taylor played bass, Billy Lewis was on drums, and Gene Estes played percussion. The vocal sessions usually took place between 8 and 10 p.m, but having been on set filming since 6 a.m, the Monkees understandably often had little energy or enthusiasm for them. Also, it was rare to have more than one Monkee at a session at a time, and whoever was performing the vocal would often need a lot of tea and sympathy before getting a performance right. Now, as you might know, the version of the theme on this album is not the same one used for the opening titles of the TV show. That 50-second version was taped later on August the 6th, and is a noticeably tighter performance than the one on the album, which was also briefly considered as their debut single. Due to a law in Italy requiring theme songs to be performed in Italian, Mickey Dolenz had to record a version in Italian, which was also released as an album track and a single in that country.
Ci chiamano i Monkees, siamo meno amati di chi si crede più intelligente.
Bread frontman David Gates, who produced Davy Jones's last session for Colpix in September 1965, wrote the album's second track, Saturday's Child. The backing tracks for Saturday's Child were recorded on July the 9th, 1966, by the same musicians who'd performed on the theme song. Peter Tork was invited to this session as a courtesy, and duly turned up with guitar in hand expecting to play, only to be told that his services were not required. Widely regarded as one of their best album tracks, Saturday's Child has been described as having a proto-heavy metal guitar riff. The song appears in the episode Monkey vs. Machine, in which the Monkees are seen in a memorable sequence playing on the beach and driving around in the Monkeemobile. British producer Mickie Most had originally been the first choice as the Monkees' producer. The version of the song he recorded with his group Herman's Hermits in March 1967 gives us an idea of how the Monkees might have sounded if he'd stayed at the helm.
Always feeling low down. Tuesday had a dream child. She's always on the go, so I'm in love with Saturday's child.
The album's third track, I Wanna Be Free, features a solo vocal by Davy Jones. Boyce and Hart wrote it before the group were formed and demoed it on November 5th, 1965. However, it underwent several different arrangements, including one heard in the pilot episode. The album track, which features acoustic guitar, harpsichord and string quartet, was arranged by Don McGuinness, who Bobby Hart asked to devise a Yesterday-type arrangement, a brief he completed admirably. The song became a fan favourite and was included in 2 series episodes. It was also released as a single in some countries, such as Australia and Singapore. Tomorrow's Gonna Be Another Day was a song that 3 other groups had already unsuccessfully tried: The Astronauts, The Sons of Adam, and Sir Raleigh and the Coupons. The tracking session took place at RCA on July the 23rd and was completed in 9 takes. Some overdubs were recorded on July the 26th before Mickey laid down his vocal later that week. Papa Jean's Blues is the first of 2 songs on the album sung and produced by Mike Nesmith. The initial tracking session, which took place on July the 7th, featured Glenn Campbell, James Burton and Peter Tork on guitar, and Hal Blaine on drums. At the session, the track was known as Brand X, and 13 takes were recorded, with 5 chosen as the basis for the final backing. The Monkees then added some impressive backing vocals, but Nesmith didn't like them and stripped them away at a later session, when he added his own lead vocal, leaving only Mickey's harmony intact. The title of this track on early pressings of the album was misspelt as Papa Jean's Blues on both label and cover. This was quickly corrected, and revised copies, such as mine, had an RE suffix added to its catalogue number. Written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin, Take a Giant Step is the final track on side 1. The song was initially recorded at the first official Monkees recording session at RCA's Studio B on June the 10th, 1966, with Snuff Garrett in the producer's chair. The session was a disaster, as the musicians, including James Burton, Glenn Campbell and Hal Blaine, didn't get along with producer Snuff Garrett, and as a result, Garrett walked out of the Monkees project. Producers Boyce, Hart and Keller returned to the song on July the 9th with new musicians, adding oboe and harpsichord for some contemporary flavour. The song would also end up as the B-side of their debut single the following month. By the end of July, Boyce and Hart had 9 songs in the can, and although some were in the running, none stood out as the lead single. Ultimately, the inspiration for that came from, you guessed it, the Beatles. Bobby Hart remembers that as he pulled into his carport one day, he punched some stations on his radio and heard the end of the Beatles' Paperback Writer. And as he listened to the fade-out, he thought they were singing Take the Last Train to Somewhere. Inspired by the phrase and the melodic movement towards the 7th note, he got together with Tommy Boyce to write a song. Hart recalled a little town in North Arizona he used to drive through, called Clarksdale. But after a few minutes, that became Clarksdale and then Clarksville. Now, there are several Clarksvilles in the United States. There's Clarksville, Arkansas, Clarksville, Tennessee, Clarksville, Texas, Clarksville, Indiana, Clarksville, Virginia, Clarksville, Maryland, Clarksville, Georgia, and Clarksville, Ohio. But it wasn't just the lyrics which made this song memorable. The song's magic ingredient is Louis Shelton's guitar work. That, coupled with engineer Dave Hassinger riding the fader on a hi-hat, and some perfectly reverbed backing vocals, gave the song a real sparkle, unlike any of their other recordings so far. Although all 4 Monkees were given turns at trying the lead vocal, it was Mickey who got the nod. Unfortunately, the unused lead vocal takes along with the multitrack, have not survived, so we'll never be able to judge which was best. Released just a few weeks later on August the 16th, Last Train to Clarksville, backed with Take a Giant Step, became the Monkees' first hit single and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on November the 5th, 1966. Because the TV show didn't premiere in the UK until December the 31st, I'm a Believer was their debut single there. Although that topped the chart in January 1967, Last Train to Clarksville peaked at only number 22 when it was released in February. Track 2 on side 2, This Just Doesn't Seem to Be My Day, was one of the first tracks laid down for the album at the July 5th session, along with the first version of the theme song. Influenced by tracks such as the Stones' Painted Black, it illustrates how plugged in its writers were to the contemporary music scene. The song also contains one of the writer's signature tempo tricks, a fast-paced verse followed by a slower chorus. The backing for Let's Dance On was initially recorded with Snuff Garrett in June, but since he was gone, another attempt had to be made. This was laid down at the Marathon July 9th tracking session, with Mickey and Peter adding vocals on July the 16th. Written by Jerry Goffin and Russ Titelman, I'll Be True to You had already been recorded under its correct title, Yes I Will, by the Hollies. Although it had been a top 10 hit for them in the UK in March 1965, it missed the charts completely in the US and Canada. The song was inspired by the Beatles' If I Fell, but ironically, for a series inspired by the film it appeared in, I'll Be True to You didn't appear in any Monkees episode. The penultimate track on the album, Sweet Young Thing, was Mike Nesmith's second production number on the album, and was a collaboration between himself and Jerry Goffin and Carole King. Although Nesmith liked them both, he found the writing environment intimidating. The resulting track is a bizarre mixture of musical styles, including bluegrass fiddle, fuzz guitar, and heavy drums. Work on the final track, Gonna Buy Me a Dog, began on July the 7th at a session produced by Mike Nesmith. The result proved unsatisfactory and sounded like a remake of Rufus Thomas's song Walking the Dog. Desperate to complete the album on time, Mickey and Davey were called into the studio to redo the vocals on July the 24th, in what turned out to be a marathon 8-hour session. Fed up of being in the studio for such a long time, Mickey and Davey started goofing around and making fun of the song.
You know my girl now?
To his credit, Bobby Hart went along with it and kept it all on the final recording, which at least gave them the impression that they'd had some creative input into the album.
Can somebody open the door and let us out?
Mixing for the album began 3 days later on July the 27th at RCA Studio B. That continued on Sunday, July the 31st, after which Don Kirshner held a listening session to select the lead-off single. Last Train to Clarksville and Take a Giant Step were chosen, and they immediately went off to RCA for pressing. At this point, Bobby Hart realised that he didn't have a cover for the album. In the end, a close friend of Boyce and Hart, Bernard Yessin, had just 10 minutes between takes on set to get 7 shots, one of which had to be the cover. Stills from the series were utilised for the film strip on the back. The first 3 photos are taken from Your Friendly Neighbourhood Kidnappers. The other 2 are from the episode The Spy Who Came In From the Cool. Released in mono and stereo on October the 10th, 1966, on the Cold Gems label, the album replaced Revolver at the top of the Cashbox charts on October the 29th. The album reached number 1 on the Billboard 200 Top Albums list on November the 12th, 1966, and remained at number 1 for 13 weeks, until the group's next album replaced it. It was released on RCA Victor in the UK on January the 20th, 1967, and spent 7 weeks at number 1 before being deposed by the UK's biggest-selling album of the 60s, The Sound of Music. If you'd like to learn more about the Monkees, and there's a lot to learn, there's only one book you need, which is this one, The Monkees Day-by-Day Story by Andrew Sandoval. This magnificent 740-page book contains 4 decades of research and features exclusive and previously unpublished photos together with interviews with the group and their associates. His company, Beetleland Books, publishes this magnificent tome, and I'll include a link in the description to where you can order a copy from. Another book that deserves your attention is this, The Monkees' Smoke-Filled Dreams. This remarkable 535-page book features the unseen photo archive of author and pop culture aficionado Joe Russo. It includes over 700 rare and unpublished images chronicling the Monkees from beginning to end. Again, check out the link in the description for more information and where you can order it from. So thank you so much to Andrew Sandoval for sending me both of these amazing books. I promise to use them well in future videos. Thank you also to everyone who voted in my recent community poll about the Monkees albums. I will eventually be making videos on all of them, including Head, so please be patient. But I'm done for this one, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.
They're coming to take us away.